Gentlemen, if I could get you to pass these out, so everybody has one. Thank you. We'll explain what that's for in just a few minutes. I want to be as brief as possible, but want to give you a heads up on what's happening. This is something we've heard about for years. Now it's here. Step by step, the liberal agenda in our country has moved forward, encroaching on our morality. For over 100 years, our educational system has been bringing us to this moment. For over 70 years, our entertainment media have brought us to this moment. And now it is here. We, as Christians, are seen as immoral for proclaiming the Word of God, and defined as such. And what we're going to talk about is something that's happening in as little as 3 weeks. The San Antonio City Council will be voting on an anti-discrimination ordinance. That sounds good. We're all anti-discrimination. But ultimately, this ordinance, because of the way it is written, and because of what is being directed through it, will end free speech and end freedom of religion in our area, as it has been done elsewhere, and we will explain briefly. First question is, what is it? It's the ordinance, and this is not happening, guys. There we go. It's just catching up. This is the existing non-discrimination policy that's in our town. And by the way, we delayed discussing this from last week because we didn't know who was actually voting on it. It is only the city council. You will not have an opportunity to vote on this. No public will. Here's it is. There will be general policy of the city of San Antonio to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age, or handicap as set forth in the division, blah, 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 blah. We're all cool with that. And again, anyone tries to get discrimination out of the Bible, better go read it again. This is the proposed changes. And the city council members are being told this is minor, it's no big deal, it has no great impact. Basically what they're doing is adding to no discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, veteran status, age, or disability. And by the way, the veterans rose up and said, we don't want to be part of this, and they've been removed from it since. Because that would have made it, for example, no discounts for veterans, and because that would be discrimination. And the veterans said, no, thank you, no, keep us out of this. All right. Definitions, and this is where it gets serious, because you have to, it's government, you've got to look at the details. Gender identity means a gender-related identity, appearance, expression, or behavior of an individual, regardless of the individual's assigned sex at birth. So behavior now is a legal definition. We'll talk about why that's scary in a moment. Sex includes both sex, the biological differences between men and women, and gender. So far, okay, boys, girls, different, got that. And encompasses sexual orientation and gender identity. That's a word you need to become familiar with. Sexual orientation means an individual's real or, this is key, perceived orientation as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or asexual. And this is not defined, not clarified. There is no requirement anywhere in the ordinance for you to somehow officially become one or the other. So let me give you an extreme idea of how this could play out. A pedophile is near our restroom, sees a child walk into the restroom of the opposite gender, decides to follow. When challenged, hey, guy, you can't go in the girl's room. I'm sorry, I'm feeling feminine today. And that would be illegal. All right? Or, I had this discussion with the young people who have been in Christian school, and they really didn't understand this, but for those of us who grew up in the other world, junior high boys, as a group, egg each other on and declare themselves girls for the day and go into the locker room where the girl's taking a shower. Totally legal under this poorly worded phrase. Yeah, I see a couple of guys grinning. Slap yourself quick. All right. Now, those are the definitions. Wrong way. I love it when it does this to me. Guys, hit the button forward. What will this... Okay, yeah, let's talk about how do you break this law? Because there's more to it than the restrooms, although the restrooms are important. Engaging in discrimination or bias or demonstrated a bias by deed or word. If you historically, and myself and the pastor would both be guilty of this over and over again, a sermon delivered any time in the past where we referred to Romans chapter 1 or Leviticus or Deuteronomy or any passage where homosexuality is defined as a sin. Guess what? We have demonstrated a bias by word. Publicly reading the Bible any time in the past, in your entire life, is it demonstrating a bias. And by the way, if you're a member of this church where that has happened, you could be, theoretically, called on if you want to do business, because one of the things they do is, in this ordinance, is you're not allowed to do business with the city if you violate this. So if you want to put a contract out to do some construction work for them, they say, fine, but you're part of True Life Church in the Universal City, and we've all heard about Joe Warren. So you need to come in and recant your belief and separate yourself from that body in order to be considered for this contract. Failing to accommodate perceived sexual identity. You own a business, you do not have restroom facilities to allow transsexuals to go to the restroom of their choice on any given day, you have violated this ordinance. Failing to provide services for the LGBT community. We'll talk about how that applies in a moment. This is how you break this law. This is how you come in violation. And then you get the penalties. Advance me, please, gentlemen. Real briefly, and I respect your time because this is politics, not the gospel, so I'm very careful about using this time, but let's use it quickly. How will it affect businesses? The standard method of coping with this is to create bathrooms, and instead of being multi-people, you only go with one. So one person in the restroom at a time. Well, they did a survey out at a public building, and by the way, you'll be paying for this, that to convert a 7-unit bathroom to single use, they were going to have to convert it down to 4, because our city code also requires a sink in everyone. That means $25,000. One church looked at there and saying, well, if we have to do that, we have 6 bathrooms, adding it up, you're over $100,000, $150,000. And every business in town will have to accommodate this in some form or fashion. Churches, there's no provision for exemption for churches in this. So start adding it up and think where your offerings are going to go. Also where your tax dollars are going to go. For businesses, for example, if you're a caterer, this has already happened out in Washington State where they have a law like this. A caterer declined to do a same-sex wedding. That caterer is now facing, because of civil lawsuit, losing their business, shutting down, and facing criminal prosecution for violation of anti-discrimination law, up to a year in jail. And that ordinance is tighter written than this one. This one actually has more flexibility. How would this apply to us? Adoption agencies that are religious in nature, Catholic adoption agencies, particularly around the country, have had to shut down because they were faced with either placing children in homes that they were against their religious principles or not being allowed to function. Businesses, as we mentioned before, could not have any contact with the city of San Antonio. If you're an elected official, you would lose office. You would be driven out of office automatically under this. This applies to nonprofits, outside churches. Tabitha's Ministries would have to accommodate the LGBT, alphabet soup, anything, whatever their requirements are, you would have to accommodate it. Now, staff, consider this. There is an exemption for a church that you can place your religious denomination first. But if a person comes in, if a guy comes in a dress and says, I'm a Baptist, you need to hire me to replace Nancy, you'd have no option. Or you'd be in violation and start facing fines and ultimately criminal penalties. I think you get the idea. I'll give you some, on the paper it has out to you some websites, particularly one in the middle, Voices for a Marriage, has all kinds of examples of how this is going to play out. Here's some thoughts. This violates the U.S. Constitution. Obviously, the First Amendment does give freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and this violates that. It also violates the Texas Religious Freedom Act. But, again, the city council are being told this will not have a profound impact on the city. It's going to cost millions for businesses, millions in tax dollars, making these accommodations of public buildings, which means you're paying for it. When we say tax dollars, just remember that means your wallet. Also, the city, your tax dollars will be paying for lawyers to defend the city against the countless lawsuits that are going to come. They're already planned from religious organizations saying, no, this violates us. What does this do for the church? Because let's get down to religion. We must hire if the person is of the same faith, no matter what their preference or practice is. Who defines that? We might say, if a person comes in, if a guy comes in and he tells us he's going to use the ladies' room, wear a dress, blah, 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 and we say, well, that's obviously in violation of our religious principles, so you're not our religion. We would not be the ones deciding that. A committee of the city government would be deciding what our religion is. It would be a city committee deciding what is acceptable speech, what is not. And let me just give you a hint. It will not be independent Baptists on that committee. So when you submit your sermon for approval, don't expect it to come back clean. It'll be all marked through and redacted. If the pastor refuses to perform a marriage for a gay couple, there's no provision in this for him to be exempt. They will say, well, if you ask questions, they'll tell you, no, that's covered. There's a religious exemption. The only religious exemption is you can give preference to your denomination for hiring. That's the only mention of religion in this entire thing. There's no accommodation for religious buildings. Our restrooms have to be converted like everyone else's. No city employee could attend our church without being fired. That's religion association being defined by the city government. Again, they would be part of our demonstrated bias if they attend here. The pastor violates this by reading the Bible or taking a biblical stand, and he will ultimately face criminal prosecution. In Canada and Sweden, where they've had these years for they're about 5 years ahead of us, there are pastors in jails today. One pastor is being held without charge, without arrest, under contempt, until he comes to court and recants his belief. We'll be in jail a long time, won't we, Pastor? All right. Finally, last slide. What can I do? I'm glad you asked that question. We passed this paper out to you. It has the phone numbers of all the people who are going to have authority in voting over this. It has a little script, 30 seconds for you to read to them. We want to pray. But as I talked to our Sunday school class today, God gives you power through prayer, but if you don't use it, don't expect anything to happen. So God's people need to get on the phone. What these people respect is not our religious beliefs, obviously not the Constitution. They respect